10 questions. My guest is Mr. Ferdinand Fudi Ferreira. Let's tell you a couple of things about him. He just received an honorary Doctor of Humane Letters from the University of Trinidad and Tobago. That was in September 2021. He was a founding member of the People's National Movement, former elections officer of the party, former labor relations officer of the PNM. He was also a foundation member and party organizer of the Organization for National Reconstruction. He's been a political advisor to former Prime Minister, the late great Dr. Eric Williams, also political advisor to Mr. Carl Hudson Phillips. He was the leader of the ONR, and he's political advisor to the current Prime Minister, Dr. Keith Rowley. We're talking in the context of a piece he wrote in response to the position of a budget put forward by the current head of the Tobago House of Assembly, Mr. Farley Augustine. Let me just tell you a little bit of what that says. At the risk of offending my fellow Trinbagonian citizens of Tobagonian origin, I must admit the almost 4-hour-long budget presentation by the Honorable Chief Secretary and Secretary for Finance leaves me not only a bit baffled, but quite honestly more amused than confused. His $4 billion proposal works out to be 1 hour talk for every $1 billion requested, with a population of 60 to 70,000 citizens, a revenue of $220 million, a party leader, now Deputy Chief Secretary, Secretary Extraordinaire. The Chief Secretary, with his overwhelming majority in the House of Assembly, in his ambitious effort to put what is his administration's opinion are all the perceived wrongs right, appear to be extremely desperate to accelerate the ATM process without any serious consideration for the national balance sheet and the consequences of the administration's generosity at the expense of the other 1.4 million taxpayers, the national revenue now way below the national expenditure, the economy, beneficiaries of welfare and social assistance, all dependent on government's deficit budgeting. Mr. Fudi Ferreira, our guest on this edition of 10 Questions. Good to have you. Good morning. Good to see you.
Morning, Andy, and morning to the listening audience.
Oh, let me start by asking whether you think the presentation of 4 hours from Mr. Augustine was too long. You say it represents...
But first of all, Andy, it's always been a problem for me looking at these long, tedious budget presentations going way back. So on one occasion, I think Dr. Williams went for 6 hours in the early days.
Yeah.
And with a population of less than 2 million people, I don't see any necessity for all these details that would subsequently come in the debate. And for a small place like it's 60 or 70,000 people, there's no necessity in my considered opinion for. But it's not for the contents.
Right.
And I make reference to it. I would like to just make a quotation before we
go ahead.
From one of the most respected leaders I consider to be a guru, Dr. Lee Kuan Yew. Americans, I'm quoting Lee Kuan Yew.
Yeah.
Americans are in a political malaise. Their academics and commentators know and publicly discuss their problems. But there is no political will in either the Republican or Democratic Party to get American voters to face the facts of life, namely that they are living beyond their means. And that to regain competitiveness, they must cut spending, especially on welfare, increase savings and investments, improve education, and improve work attitudes before consumption can be allowed to go up again.
All right. And you're saying that to say what in this case?
Yes. I make reference to this in the context of the comments which I think you have in a possession of well-known economist Vaness James, the Begonian himself, in the article on Sunday the 3rd.
Yeah.
Corey Connolly.
Who in fact is a significant supporter of Mr. Augustine. He is his financial and economic guru,
yes.
right?
And I think he had some considerable input into the preparation of the budget. And his comments are very, not only informative, but very interesting. he's telling you on the basis of the budget, you're living above your means. And this is, in his own remarks, termed, Tobago's economy depends on Trinidad economy to finance government, which explains that we are in the same situation. We were in 1889, and he goes on to say, he added, we are not even talking about private sector issue. So you have to ask yourself, what are we doing here? This is about living way above our means. And that is the definition of a failed economy.
And he's referring to Mr. Augustine's presentation.
Correct. He's making reference to the Tobago's revenue. Plus, and the expenditure. Your revenue is about $220 million. But your expenditure, he said, in other words, in my opinion, he said, it's not the best place to be. Yeah. And this is a source of concern. And he goes on to state that we are in the same position that we were in 1889, totally dependent on Trinidad. So I thought that, without attempting to offend my fellow Tobagonian citizens, that this ought to be a source of concern.
But you make that point. You say you begin by saying and then you end by saying that you hope what you said here, what you were going to say and then what you said would not be seen as offensive to the people in Tobago. What is the sense that you have as to how people may have received this?
In that there is the perception that based on the arbitration award, the Tobago, whether the revenue increases, whether it declines, whatever the source of revenue, that these are our entitlements based on a perception many years ago projected by Ian Robinson about the oil rights, and which be correct, that part of the oil revenue, sources of the revenue comes in the waters of Tobago. But it's one country, Trinidad and Tobago. Yeah. So there is always this, as I said, with this demand from Tobago, regardless, the point I'm making is regardless of the source of revenue. It's an entitlement. Whatever we contribute is not important. As part of Trinidad and Tobago, we are entitled to this without taking into consideration the demands.
Yeah, because there's a figure that was established with years ago since Robinson was there.
And he's now trying to, well, of course, the maximum is 6.9. Yeah. And he's now applying for that 6.9. Of course, they don't normally get it. But the fact of the matter, with 60 to 70,000 people on the island, with a proposal for $4 billion, I find, particularly in an area of deficit budgeting, most of the social demands have to be maintained, and that's you're operating under a deficit budget.
Right. I want to ask you something quite apart from what you've written here. What in the light of the elections, which delivered the kind of results that it did in the Tobago House of Assembly elections, the last one, 14-1, as the case may be, after the 6-6 tie and the adjustment and the recalibration of the island's electoral districts and so on. The government in Trinidad said, well, we will work sort of constructively with them. You think that is going to hold? And well, that the politics wouldn't overtake the relations between both sides when it comes down to the brass tacks?
Again, it depends. As I said in the article, I made reference to the political value of Tobago on both sides. Yeah. What I also mentioned here is, in spite of the demands from the local government bodies in Trinidad, from the opposition constituencies, nobody has expressed their concern in the light of the allocations and the continued demands for Tobago. But what about us?
Yeah.
Because they are complaining all the time, and you're seeing every night what's going on in those remote areas in terms of the landscapes, the bad roads, the short. But they have not expressed any concern.
Yeah, because you have it down here, you talk about the fact that well, what you call the silence of the people in the local government bodies in Trinidad.
If you could give Tobago that, and in the politics, as you know, I mean, you might not be as old, not as old as I am by experience. They say, well, how you could give, and the traditional allegations by the traditional opposition forces that when the PNM in power, they concentrate most of the money. From 1956, that had been the allegations. Nothing had been done south of the Caroni River. Now Tobago is making a demand with 60 to 70,000 for $4 billion in the light of what they are going through.
Yeah, I want to come to that, but let's take the point you make here about, you say in here that how the thing is set up administratively and otherwise, Tobago House of Assembly, and therefore the people in Tobago are better off structurally, how the politics is structured, than people in Trinidad working with the local government system that leads into the national political system. You say they are better off than us.
Well, certainly. I mean, I don't know when last, I haven't been there for a couple of years, but the last time I was in Tobago, the infrastructure, you don't you hear complaints every now and then, but you don't get the kind of complaints that you see coming out of Barapon and Maruga about roads and general infrastructure. Yeah. You don't get that coming from Tobago.
Physical maintenance.
Yes, I mean, and let's face the reality. In spite of the fact that the former government, in the Tobago House of Assembly,
the former administration.
There is nobody could question the amount of money they spent in cooperation with the national government. Yeah. There is no county council in Trinidad that has a hospital like the one in Knoxville. The fire stations. One, just not forget, in the inter-island crisis, which I was involved as a commissioner on the port, in which I was constructively dismissed. Have you ever taken in consideration the amount of money that was spent? The two vessels cost $1 billion. Hello, these are two vessels. The AP, one in addition to the other contractual obligations with the Cabo Star, the Galleon Passage, and all that transpired between the period of the departure of the Superfast Galaxia and the arrival of the year is almost $2 or $3 billion.
You think that people in Tobago are being encouraged not to look at these things in the proper perspective and just take position, sort of, which are in some cases.
We have to take the thing in the context. What happened in September? In September, general elections, Shampa Kojo won by nearly over 3,000 votes. In
2020?
Yes, in the Tobagoese candidate won by about 1,800 votes. That was September. By January, there was a 6-6. What happened between September and January? And a few months after, it was 14-1. That's a political analysis. As a matter of fact, I wrote about it. I said the PNM ought to go into a serious discussion as to what happened within 4 months. There was no earthquake, there was no calamity.
Well, not naturally, but certainly that was.
It turned out correct. It turned out to be a political calamity in which the PNM was wiped out. Yeah. And what happened between September that resulted in that? I don't believe it was Watson Duke. Fairly pretty young, constructive, apparently nice personality. It's the internal convulsions in the PNM. In Tobago, if you observe during the election, not a word from Orville London, an excellent speaker, very articulate. Kelvin Pierre, is his name? That's the secretary.
Kelvin Charles.
Kelvin Charles. The departure of Dennis Sawyer Fat. The absence of Calendar, who's Stanford Calendar.
Stanford Calendar.
And in terms of who, so of that added, and remember they're small constituencies, so a few dissatisfied elements within the party would be. Look at some of the margins of the field.
We're going to take a break. When we come back, I want to raise something you make here. You say here about what I would construe to be Farley's sort of arrangements and accommodation with what Sunduku described him as a secretary extraordinaire. You're talking about it in that kind of way. But we'll take a break. We're coming back. This is 10 Questions on this Friday morning. Stay with us.
Here, got phone bill, light bill, and a plane ticket. Where does ticket come from? Who flying here? And look, the roof leaking now.
It sounds like you need a loan from Eastern Credit Union during the Dobita promotion.
But who is you?
And that's a question you're asking. You can get a loan for mortgage, home equity, debt consolidation, and a Georgie bundle. You know it's a Georgie bundle? Like everything in one. You can also get a chance to win up to $30,000 in prizes.
But there's my robe.
Focus, Daryl. He's sounding like you know what he's talking about. Eastern Credit Union have us covered. I don't talk.
And this promotion running until August 30th. You need to go down there right now.
But why you have my toothbrush?
You still asking another question. We will be here when you come back. Go down there, let me fix the roof, and they can probably get a new bed. Their bed doesn't making a lot of noise. So go down the road, Eastern Credit Union.
But how you know about my bed?
Don't beat up, Darrell. Hurry up, hurry up. Don't beat up. We will be here.
So, tell me more about this Dobita promotion.
Well,
FanZone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today.
Welcome back to the program. This is 10 Questions. Our guest, Mr. Fudi Ferreira, recently designated as a national patriot, an honorary PhD from the University of Trinidad and Tobago. He's talked about his, we talked about his continuing collaboration with political leaders in one party or the other in Trinidad and Tobago's politics for decades. So you say here that you describe the party leader, that is the party that is now in charge in Tobago, the party leader who was a deputy chief secretary. You say you describe him as a secretary extraordinaire, and you say this is a luxury few developed, far less developing countries can afford. The question is, to what extent do you think this is highly irregular?
Well, let me begin by stating, Andy, shortly after Fadi's success at the polls, he made a statement today, as a matter of fact, that he was requested by Orville London to join the PNM. Ho Choi Charles invited him to join his organization. However, and somebody, I think Sawyer Fat, some other name he called that asked him. And his answer,
Angus.
And his answer was he ignored, and he joined what's joke, what's patriot.
Yeah.
And nobody asked him. Today, nobody asked him why.
The Progressive Democratic Party, the PDP.
That this fairly, apparently so far, constructive, relatively young man, he declined Orville London. He declined Ho Choi Charles. He declined
Dr. Sawyer Angus.
And nobody asked him why he joined you. And I made no apologies for expressing my concern The only thing that I know they have in common, I mean, subject to correction, I think they are both Assembly Adventists. Duke is Assembly Adventist, and I think Farley is Assembly Adventist, subject to correction. And nobody asks him why. Because it's knowing Duke what we do, knowing the character. He's the leader of the party. He has not been given a portfolio. He has not been given any, let's say, exacting responsibility. But he's been given a budget of $60 million. That ought to be a concern in a small country. Few countries, particularly small countries, could afford a minister extraordinary without any direct responsibility. And in that context, as a matter of fact, between his success at the polls and today, he has almost one of his major responsibilities defending some of the inappropriate statements by the leader of the party.
Yep.
Yet he gets a deputy, travels all over the place with them. So that ought to be a sort of concern, not only to Tobagonians, but to
the people
all
of Trinidad and Tobago.
Yes, because the revenue comes from both countries.
All right. Another point you make here, you use the term on more than one occasion. You say that, okay, you could see where he wants to probably make the perceived wrongs right. So you refer to them as perceived. You don't consider them to be real wrongs, is how you look at it. But if they feel that they're wrong,
well, certainly he's entitled to his own views on what was wrong, and certainly the PNM in Tobago has questions to answer on the basis of the consistent audit reports that have always asked questions that today remain unanswered. So they are, while I use the term perceive, I use it in the context of how he feels. If these things are wrong, all may not be wrong, but the process in trying to get them wrong can't be as of demanding more money or questioning more money from Trinidad without showing us or indicating two things. One, any sources of increased revenue. Look at the URP. He has increased. You know that's a temporary makeshift thing to accommodate unemployed people. He increased the salaries for the URP and the by nearly 100%, you know. You're not taking into consideration the consequential effects on the people in Trinidad.
Mm-hmm. All right, you also say here, I also know only too well how Trinbagonians of Tobagonian origin benefit from the almost $2.5 billion they receive annually. How well they benefit from the strategic political position they continue to use to their political advantage. What do you refer to in that case?
Of course.
The strategic political position they continue to use to their political advantage.
We just got to go back to the history of Robinson. If you remember, I was part of the ONR.
Yeah.
That, in other words, if you put it in a nutshell, and you can't form no government without me. So that is the strategic advantage. Both sides are looking forward. The UNC is hoping that whether they win the seats or not, but PNM don't win them. And you may have a situation, as a matter of fact, it's been expressed on several occasions that the leader of the PDP in Tobago is looking forward to be part of the next government under the opposition. He's making no secret about it. He said it. He's going to use the same Robinson approach to negotiate. So that puts them in a strategic position. In addition to the fact that the Prime Minister of Trinidad is a Tobagonian, the last thing he would want to do or say anything that is likely to affect his political stakes. So they are, as I've said, the dice is loaded in favor of Tobago with 60 to 74 billion dollars in addition to all the other commitments, the inter-island ferry. Look at the demands by Carl.
Yeah, on the air bridge.
My friend Martin George, he said he doesn't care about the cost. A plane must always be there to take Tobagonians to Trinidad and forward. What the cost is essential service, and these to me are things that are citizens responsible. I have no problem with Tobago getting its share, maybe a little more than its fair share, but we got to look
Yeah, and again, you make the point in another part of the statement here. You think that there should have been, and there continues for the need to be more discussion and dialogue about this issue in Trinidad, quite apart from what is happening in Tobago. This demand from Mr. Augustine for that kind of revenue.
Well, certainly.
In a case where it's untenable, it's unsustainable.
Yes, I mean, certainly it has to be a source of concern. It's one country, it's Trinidad and Tobago. But look at the recent conflict, or apparent conflict, let me use that term, with the Carnival in Tobago. You're getting these, to me, inappropriate utterances coming out, sometimes on both up. You're getting a sense that, look, we could do without you all. And this has been going on for a long time, and I don't think it is in the best interest of these patriotic citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. We are one country. We have done extremely well. We have come a long way. Tobago has given us some of its best sons and daughters. First governor of the Central Bank, local, Victor Bruce, Ivor Archie. We have had 7 prime ministers in this country. 3 south of the Caroni River. Manim, Kamla, Pande. 2 north of the Caroni River. 2 from Tobago. A small country. Everybody, every section has shared. Some might have gotten more than others. But how many countries small could make that comparison? 3 south of the Caroni River. Manim, Kamla, Pande. 2 north of the Caroni River. Chambers and Dr. Williams. And 2 from Tobago.
And to some extent, Chambers was from south of the river and then came north. All right, I want to ask you, but you make a point here about, you say the political dice is heavily loaded in favor of Tobago. You talk about not St. George's, Tobago, Martin, Caroni, what have you. But you say, you quote Baze Pandey saying here, politics really has a morality of its own. First of all, I want to ask you if you think that statement was interpreted in the way that it was meant. It was meant. For me, a lot of people misread it entirely and misrepresented it, thinking that he was saying that, concluding that he was saying that politics has no morality, but it is a morality that is different from how we understand morality. To what extent that?
What I'm saying is here, in my considered opinion, these over-generous proposals a bit, and the politicians who ought to be commenting, particularly at the opportunity level, in what Tobago is getting against what they are going through in their constituencies, particularly with the flooding and they are, as far as they are concerned, and once PNM get defeated, you could get them the treasury. And of course it would be very difficult, as I mentioned previously, for the Prime Minister of Tobagonian origin, who is already a victim as a result of the results of the elections, almost wiped out. He's a very...
You think he's in a particularly dicey situation? Correct.
If he comments about of course, at the end of the day, it's the Minister of Finances will make and the government will make the final decision in terms of the allocation. But so, and it's got to be, all his utterances has to be guarded. Because he's trying to recover from what happened. Because he knows only too well, if those 2 seats don't go to PNM, he could be in serious trouble. Yeah. So there's a level there of questionable morality in terms of, as I quoted Lee Kuan Yew, unpopular decisions that are likely to appear to be unpopular. Yeah. So everybody on the P's and Q's, they garden the estate like Spanish gold.
All right, so it's not easy going on this. All right, but we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much. This has been 10 questions, I guess. Freddie Ferreira, the one and only. I'm Andy Johnson. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
WESN.
Get ready for an explosion of music, an August evening